Good Friday morning, everyone. This is Mike Montefusco, National Weather Service, Wakefield, Virginia. This is our special Friday briefing regarding our upcoming weekend coastal storm. We'll be talking about the changes that we are starting to see in a little bit in the models here. Once we get into the meat of the briefing, we do have a little bit of some changes we are kind of showing here that we wanted to pass along to you. So let's go ahead and get started with our highlights. We are still looking at a significant coastal event to push into the region over the upcoming weekend. We are looking for that system continuing to develop off the southeast coast today, moving along the coast of our mid-Atlantic coast over the upcoming weekend. Still looking for onset of heavy rain, winds, and some coastal flooding impacts, along with some significant marine impacts over the upcoming weekend into early next week as well. That coastal flooding will be kind of exacerbated by the king tide that are ongoing through the weekend. So you are going to start to note that. We are likely going to need some coastal flood watches later on in the day to go into effect. So you will probably see that occurring. High winds are going to start to ramp up tomorrow later in the day into the evening hours. You are going to see that once we break through the upcoming slide with kind of timing things out. We'll do that also with the marine weather forecast as well. Getting into the weather pattern outlook for the storm into early next week. Once again, that low is over the Florida Peninsula today. That will kind of lift up along the Florida-Georgia coast today into tonight, and then it kind of lifts up over the day through the day tomorrow and into Sunday. Now let me move in as we kind of have this low, as you see on the forecast track, kind of going along the Outer Banks and kind of lifting up along the mid-Atlantic coast and just offshore before exiting into Tuesday. Let's do a brief model discussion real quick just to kind of show what it is we're looking at and kind of go back to tomorrow morning right here. This is 12Z tomorrow morning, so this is right at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And you can see the GFS, which is kind of collection of the GFS, some members of the GFS ensemble here on the left. On the right, we have the European ensemble members, which basically kind of shows all the low tracks kind of clustered off the East Florida coast. As we kind of trip through the forecast here, you can kind of see both models are kind of lifting up along the coast with respect to kind of showing that going up along the Carolina coast through the day tomorrow into tomorrow night. And then getting into the day on Sunday, kind of lifting up again a little bit closer to the area. Now, one trend you'll note that we're seeing here, rather than getting into any one particular model, looking at the ensembles themselves, this trend is slower. So that is definitely one trend here as you get into Sunday morning. This is 8 a.m. Sunday morning. The majority of those members are still right along the southeast coast, North Carolina coast. In the case of the GFS, a little bit farther south across the European. The majority of the GFS members are a little bit faster. The European is a little bit slower. In general, the guidance has slowed down. So that's the bad news. There will be a more prolonged kind of impact of some stronger winds, and the rainfall totals have kind of gone up a little bit as well as a result of that. And we'll get into the actual rainfall in just the next little bit. The good news is there is the stronger winds that we were seeing have kind of gotten a little bit less hot, if you will. And you'll see that in the briefing as well, as those max winds have kind of come down a very little bit. So you'll start to see the probabilities start to diminish a little bit for those really, really high winds that we were talking about this time yesterday. Cutting into the model QPF and the model going into timing out the rainfall breaking into the region, you can kind of see off the HRRR here, getting into the day here today, not really a whole lot, maybe a couple of spits or some light sprinkles along the immediate coast this evening into the overnight hours tomorrow, but really not really a whole lot. As you get into the day tomorrow, there might be some scattered showers around during the morning and especially into the afternoon hours, but really for the most part, those heavier showers, as you kind of see here, start to move up. The more prolonged, consistent rainfall kind of breaks into the area as we get into later tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night especially. So those higher rainfall rates, the more persistent, moderate to locally heavy rainfall, those will start to move in tomorrow night into Sunday morning. So that's kind of one change. Is the model evolution is just kind of showing slower. So that is one bit of bad news. There is going to be a little bit more in the way of QPF, which you are going to see in the graphics going forward here. The excessive rainfall outlook for our region is, again, kind of maintaining that heavier rainfall signal along the coast, and then that lingers into the day on Monday, especially on the eastern shore side. We do have a slight risk from our colleagues at the Weather Prediction Center, a slight risk for excessive rainfall along the immediate coast of eastern tidewater into northeast North Carolina. That is for tomorrow. For Sunday, that heavy rain threat kind of shifts up along to the eastern shore, lower eastern shore, Maryland, Virginia, and that kind of continues on into the day on Monday. Rainfall totals, as you see here, once again, these totals have gone up a little bit because the duration of the heavier rainfall has kind of extended out a bit more, especially along the coast, kind of extends along a little bit more into the day on Monday, especially on the eastern shore side. So these heavier totals will kind of linger into the day on Monday, into Monday night. Inland, you're still looking at, around 1 inch to 1.5 inches for the Richmond metro region, I-95 and on east especially, and then just east of I-95, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, potentially up to 2-3 inches into the peninsulas and northern neck. With respect to worst case, and this is generally just off of the models, the model-based worst case scenario, you're generally looking at generally 2-3 inches of rain over the west, 4 to 6 inches of rain, and there will be some pockets of heavier rainfall with some convective elements that get involved with this system as it moves up. But for the most part, the worst case scenario, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain possible in spots. It's not going to be widespread like this, but there will be some spots of 4, 5, 6 inches of rain likely occurring by the time all is said and done as we get into the day on Monday. For the high wind potential, next couple of days, once again, the higher wind numbers that we've been looking at and really concerned about, getting into 55, 60 mile per hour that we were talking about yesterday, that's come down a bit. So on the good side, the lows look a little bit like not as strong a low. So the gradient will be a little bit less of an issue. So it will be a lower max. However, it will be a more sustained period of wind. So that gusty wind is going to linger around for a little bit longer. So your threat starts to ramp up tomorrow, likely later on in the day, tomorrow night especially, on into Sunday morning. That's going to continue through the day on Sunday into Monday afternoon, evening, especially on the eastern shore side. You can start to see a little bit of a kind of an elevated threat right around the Ocean City area, Assateague area, continuing into Monday afternoon. And remaining gusty even into Monday night, Tuesday morning along the eastern shore and even eastern tidewater region. With respect to the high wind potential, these are the max wind gusts that we have in there. These are in miles per hour because it's land-based. Generally 25 to 30 in the Richmond metro region on east. A little bit higher, 35 to 45 along the coast. Potentially up to 50 or so along the immediate coast, especially on the Maryland eastern shore side, Virginia eastern shore side, perhaps down even to Cape Henry area. Really pretty much matches up with what you see here on the sampler, where we kind of have that kind of ramp up later tomorrow in the evening hours into Sunday morning. That's going to be the worst of it. But that wind you can kind of see in the sampler that kind of hangs around a little bit longer. It hangs into Monday night for most of the area where it remains gusty. And that gust threat kind of maintains into the day on Tuesday. While we are clearing out, it will remain gusty even into the day on Tuesday. And that's going to have some impacts with the coastal flooding, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides from here. As far as coastal flooding goes, we do have a coastal flood advisory now into the afternoon hours for generally for the tidal James into the lower bay for some nuisance to low end minor coastal flooding up to a foot of inundation there. So again, a couple of roads here or there might be impacted, but generally more minor stuff for today. It's certainly more concerned with what's going on over the weekend, which we'll talk about here. So this is for tonight and tomorrow. Generally, not as big an issue for the next couple of cycles. Certainly, nuisance to low end minor possible over the next couple of tide cycles. You'll see that as we get into the tables themselves, the hydrographs themselves. As we get into Sunday and Monday, we're really concerned about these because certainly we are looking for a pretty decent surge of some water pushing in with those winds increasing. And there is some good news there, but the bad news is this is going to sustain itself into Monday evening's tide cycle. Let's get into the individual real quickly, getting into the Upper Bay first. For Bishop's Head, once again, kind of a couple tide cycles for tomorrow morning. Certainly looking at some issues with this morning and then tomorrow morning with some nuisance to low end minor tidal flooding. You'll see it in Chrisfield, Lewisetta, both. Generally getting into nuisance to low end minor next couple of days. So that you'll see that coastal flood threat ramps up as we get into Sunday evening into Monday, where we start to get into the potential for some moderate flooding at Chrisfield, Lewisetta, as that water starts to lift up the bay some. In the lower bay, this is definitely a situation where we'll see some issues starting to ramp up. Certainly today, you'll have some, again, nuisance to low and minor next couple of mornings, this morning, and then again tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. But tomorrow night, Sunday, into Sunday evening, you're going to see some issues. Let's go back over to the models and kind of break through here on the lower James side, especially. And this is at Sewell's Point. And again, we're going to base off of the NAIFs here because it's more ensemble based versus the other guidance. And you can kind of look at the surge we were kind of keying in on yesterday, seeing how early it was. Well, this surge looks like it comes a little bit later because the timing is a little bit slower. So as a result of that, I think this initial surge that we were looking at, this initial tide Sunday morning that we were looking at, looks like it might not be this really high number that we were keying in on, but still nonetheless, looking at the middle of the road type forecast here, 5.7, 5.8 somewhere, generally right in that solid moderate coastal flood range for the Sewell's Point area. So certainly solid moderate type flood impacts looking with that. Now that tidal anomaly then persists because that is going to be a more sustained period of northeast winds. That's going to lock in those hot elevated tide levels a little bit longer into Monday afternoon, Monday evening, into early Tuesday morning. And so there will be several tide cycles where we're at least minor to low and moderate going into Sunday night, Monday evening. So that will be an issue to deal with. It won't be the one really high tide cycle and then it goes away. It'll be more elevated initially, and then it kind of sticks around into the early portions of next week. Elizabeth River, this is around the Midtown Tunnel area. Again, middle of the road type forecast, getting into the 6.2, 6.3, 6.4 range. So once again, we're into that moderate range. So certainly that's going to be something that we're going to need to deal with during the Sunday morning tide cycle. So certainly getting elevated as we get into Sunday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning. But that Sunday morning tide cycle is going to be what we're most concerned about. But it will be sticking around as we get into the later portions of Sunday into early next week. And then lastly, for Yorktown area, again, not quite as high. You're kind of seeing the middle of the road, 50th percentile forecast, about 5.5 with respect to Yorktown. That's getting into major flooding. So that's going to be a kind of a big one to deal with for the Yorktown area. And then it does kind of back off some, but that surge and those tidal anomalies that are going to hang around, that elevated water that's going to stick around, kind of keeps that into moderate to minor to at least low end moderate into the Tuesday morning tide cycles. So kind of a sustained threat for coastal flooding that is, kind of the worst Sunday afternoon, evening tide cycles. again, exacerbated by the ongoing king tides. So that's going to be an issue, as will the rainfall that's moving into the area. So that fresh water will also be playing in as well. So we're going to have to keep an eye on these. As I said, coastal flood watches are likely to be needed as we get into the day today, or get into the next briefing that'll be issued later on today. You'll likely see coastal flood watches are going to be put into place. Going a little farther out, looking at Smithfield, again, you're looking at very similar type situation, minor with getting into moderate to major as you get into that Sunday afternoon tide cycle. Kind of same situation, Jamestown and Kiptopeak. Kind of that tide cycle later on in the day, Sunday afternoon, with the timing being a little bit slower. Looking at that tide cycle Sunday afternoon being the one to watch for out that way. But again, kind of lingering. And as we get the hydrographs going a little farther out in time, you're going to kind of start to see that kind of lingering into the early portions of next week. On the ocean side, from Duck over to up the coast to Chincoteague and Ocean City, getting into a couple of cycles of some nuisance to minor next couple of mornings, really getting into that as you get into Sunday morning at Duck, and then later on into the mid to late day from up the coast to Chincoteague over to Ocean City, that Sunday morning tide cycle, getting into some minor to moderate flooding. Once again, coastal flood watches are likely to be needed. On the marine side of things, we have gone over to a gale watch rather than a storm watch, with the winds kind of being a little bit lower as the forecast has evolved over the Currituck Sound and the far southern waters. Storm watch remains from the North Carolina-Virginia border all the way up to Ocean City. Once again, we're looking at northeast winds ramping up into the sustained gale range, 35, 45 knots, with gusts to 50 knots in here. I'd say looking at the probabilities, it's especially more likely for our northern waters. Once you get north of Paramore Island, be up this way. Otherwise, gale watch is in effect for the rest of the waters, with winds increasing to 30, 35 knots, gusts into solid gale, 45 knots or so during that time range. Seas ramping up quickly. Again, we're kind of talking about the threat for those seas ramping up rather quickly. You'll see that as we get into that slide in a couple of minutes here. Once again, some gusts into the mid 40s, upper 40s. We're a little bit less concerned with respect to storm force gusts in the lower bay, but we certainly can't rule them out. So kind of watching these probabilities in the lower bay. At this point, I think the gale watch that it's ongoing still looks good, but certainly keep an eye on the Bay Bridge Tunnel area during that period, especially tomorrow night on into Sunday morning. Looking at that wind overview, once again, you'll kind of notice the timing has kind of pushed out a bit, a little bit longer in duration for one thing, but also a little bit later as well with the later timing. So the onset of the strongest winds looks like certainly after midnight tomorrow night on into Sunday morning, and then kind of hanging around into the day on Monday. So a longer window of that elevated wind, but these high max winds are not quite as high as they have been in the past couple of briefings that you've seen. So there is a little bit of good news there, but there is a little bit of not so great news as well, in that these winds do look to linger a little bit longer. The wind summary, again, kind of saying the same thing. Winds kind of remain elevated a little bit longer into sustained gale before they do start to ramp down through the day on Tuesday from south to north. The seas forecast, once again, those seas do ramp up rather quickly into the 12 to 15 foot range, with some occasional wave heights getting up into upper teens to around 20 foot with respect to the occasional wave heights. So certainly some dangerous boating conditions pushing into the region, potentially getting into some high surf as well as we get into later in the weekend, early next week. those seas building quickly. You can kind of see ramping up once we get into Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, evening time frame, and that's kind of hang around some as we get into the early portions of next week, mainly with the wind wave, northeasterly wind wave, a second component as those winds kind of turn around with a little bit of a secondary northwesterly swell as well, with respect to more wind wave coming in addition to that swell. So the combination of that swell and the wind waves are going to create a deteriorating, increasingly dangerous marine environment, especially tomorrow night, Sunday into Sunday night. That's pretty much all I have at this time. We're going to have an updated briefing later on today. It will be posted online by 3:30, around 3:30 or so. We will also have additional briefings like this. The video briefings will continue throughout the weekend upcoming, so we'll maintain that battle rhythm tomorrow and on Sunday as well. So we will keep you apprised of the latest. We will be able to give you the latest information through briefings as well, and we will present these briefings throughout the weekend and into early next week. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will speak with you again tomorrow.